Greetings! I'm Sean Bagshaw, a landscape photographer and photography educator from Ashland, Oregon, and it's great to be one of the instructors here at the Lightroom Virtual Summit. In this class, I'm going to teach you how you can sync images between Lightroom Classic and the Creative Cloud version of Lightroom, which enables you to view, organize, and edit your images from any computer, phone, or tablet, wherever you are, anywhere in the world. A lot of Lightroom Classic users don't realize this is something that you can even do, or the fact that you're actually already paying for it. Getting it set up and understanding how it works can be tricky at first, but it's actually pretty easy to do, and it's my job to teach you how. Before we go any further, I'll clarify that this class is for people who have the Adobe Photography plan, which gives you access to both Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. There have been two versions of Lightroom for a while. They've been called different things, but currently the fully featured version of Lightroom that is computer-based is called Lightroom Classic. The cloud-based version, which has been called Lightroom Mobile or Lightroom CC in the past, is now simply called Lightroom. For clarity, I'll be calling them Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud. If instead of the photography plan, you have the Lightroom plan, that one only includes Lightroom Cloud, so this class won't be very useful for you. If you do have the $10 per month photography plan, it comes with Lightroom Cloud, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, and 20 gigabytes of cloud storage. Or for $20 a month, you can get 1 terabyte of cloud storage if you need more space. A lot of photographers use Lightroom Classic because it has more features and allows us to manage large catalogs of images that we keep locally on our hard drives. My other class for the Lightroom Virtual Summit is on understanding how Lightroom catalogs and the library module work for Lightroom Classic, so check that out if that sounds helpful. The cool part is that Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud can talk to each other. And if you know how, they can be used together to get the advantage of both Lightroom on your computer and out in the cloud. Before you can get Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud to talk to each other, there are a few things to make sure you have set up correctly. First, you need to log into your Adobe Creative Cloud desktop app and then go to Apps and All Apps and make sure that both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic are installed and up to date. And if you want to be able to access your Lightroom Cloud images on other computers and laptops, then you need to install Lightroom on all of those computers as well. And if you'd like to access your images on a phone or a tablet, then go to the App Store in each device, search for Adobe Lightroom, and install it there, and you'll probably need to log into your Adobe account there. Next, open Lightroom Classic on your computer, and then go up and click on the little cloud icon in the upper right-hand corner. Here you can see your cloud storage and how much of that you've used. You can click this link to go to syncing frequently asked questions on the web if you need to, but hopefully after this class you won't need to go there very often. And then down here you can click on this gear icon, and that will open up your Lightroom Sync settings, and we'll come back and look at that more later. And to get things syncing between Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud, you just need to click Start Syncing. If there's information that needs to be synced, it'll indicate that right here. And when you have a green check mark, that lets you know that everything available to be synced is synced. And that's all there is to it. Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud are now communicating through your Adobe Creative Cloud account, and you're ready to begin syncing photos back and forth. You'll now be able to access your synced images from anywhere in the world on all your devices and computers, and even with someone else's computer, as long as you log into your own Adobe Creative Cloud account from there. As Lightroom Classic users, we mainly access our images and work on them from Lightroom Classic. However, we keep the Lightroom Classic catalog and all of our images on hard drives and not out in the cloud, which means we can't access them through the cloud from our phones, tablets, or laptops, or at least we couldn't until now. We've turned on syncing, so let's start working with it. To get the hang of syncing, I find it helpful to open both Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud on my computer and view them side by side. Later on, you can do syncing jobs from either one by itself without having to look at the other one, and you'll just know what the result's going to be. In the Catalog tab in Lightroom Classic, there's a collection called All Synced Photographs. This shows us photos that are synced with Lightroom Cloud. And if it says 0, that means you have no images synced. Now, when sync is turned on, like we just did, you can drag a single image up to that collection, and that will now sync that image to Lightroom Cloud. Syncing to Lightroom Cloud takes a little while. Depending on your internet speed and other factors, it can take up to a few minutes for things to completely sync. But if you look at the little cloud icon up here, we can see the little blue circle. And if we click on it, we can see that it's working away at syncing. And so eventually that image is going to show up over here in Lightroom Cloud. And there it is. In Lightroom Cloud, when you're in the Photos area, so you open up Photos there, you'll see that any synced photos show up in All Photos and also here under Recently Added. All Photos and All Synced Photographs are actually the same location on the cloud, so those two collections show and are the same thing. Back in Lightroom Classic, you can tell that the image has synced to Lightroom Cloud by the little double arrow icon in the upper right corner of that image. And you don't have to sync just single images at a time. You can select multiple images and sync those. And we'll make sure that that is progressing. Yep, it's working on syncing 2 photos. And the sync's done. For some reason, it only synced 2 of the photos and didn't sync that third one. And I'm not sure why, but we've got here all synced photos is just 3. And if we take a look, it's just those 3 that match. So why that 4th one didn't sync, I'm not sure, but it's not a big deal. If we gave it another try, I'm sure we could get it to sync. So while we can sync individual images or groups of images by dragging them to the All Synced Photographs collection, we can't sync, for example, entire folders of images or anything from the folders section of our Lightroom catalog. But what we can sync are collections down in the collections section of the Lightroom catalog. You can sync collections that you already have made. For example, here's a collection called Desktop Images. And in that, I just have some images that I want to have as desktop backgrounds on my laptop, for example. So if I want to sync that collection of 21 images over to Creative Cloud, I can just come over here next to the collection, and you'll see this little box turns into the same double arrow that we see on synchronized images. And if I click that arrow, that will now turn syncing on for that entire collection, and Lightroom Classic will begin syncing all of these images in the collection to Lightroom Cloud. I'm going to do some editing in this class and cut out the syncing times, because if you had to wait for the syncs to happen, this would be a really long class and you would get really bored. Okay, now those images have synced. Actually, it says there's still some information that's syncing here in Lightroom Classic, but we'll let it work on that for now. And when we look over here, we can see these photos, those additional photos have been added into All Photos. Here they all are. And in addition to All Photos, the Desktop Images collection has been added under Albums. And there it is, Desktop Images, 21 images. So in Lightroom Cloud, collections are called albums. It's a little confusing, but essentially collections and albums are the same thing. Syncing a collection is just as easy as clicking on the little double arrow icon next to any collection and letting it sync. That's it. It's that easy. Now you can't sync collection sets. Notice no double arrow icon next to it. And you can't sync smart collections. No icon there either. You can only sync regular standard collections. When you add images to Lightroom Cloud from Lightroom Classic, the original full-size images don't get synced. What gets synced are called smart previews. Smart previews are DNG files that are 2,560 pixels on the long side. So images in the 2:3 aspect ratio, like they are from most digital cameras, are 25 megabytes. And those have enough resolution to create decent print quality up to about 10 or 15 inches on the long side. So smart previews have enough resolution for screen viewing, sharing on the web, and doing Lightroom editing as well. The little dash circle you see in the lower right corner in Lightroom Cloud tells you that there's a smart preview for that image in the cloud, but that the original is not backed up to the cloud. There are a lot of cool things about smart previews, but one really cool thing is that these smart previews do not take up any of your cloud storage space. So theoretically, you could sync all of your images from Lightroom Classic to the Lightroom Cloud as smart previews like this, and no storage would be taken up. So what else is part of a smart preview? Well, if you come down here, click on any image and come down to the little info tab, you can see that things like your star ratings, the camera info and settings, and other metadata all come across with the smart preview. Also, any keywords that you had with the image come across. And things like star ratings and metadata, if you change them here in the cloud, those will sync back and forth between Lightroom Classic and the cloud. But keywords don't sync back and forth. So before you move images over to the cloud, make sure they have all the keywords that you want. Another thing that doesn't come across with the smart previews are color labels. Notice that all the images in my Lightroom Classic collection have the red color label, but there are no color labels in Lightroom Cloud. What if you want to stop syncing images or collections, or if you want to remove synced images or collections from the cloud? Well, to stop syncing a collection, all you have to do is come back over to that double arrow and uncheck it. This pops up a little message that says, are you sure you want to stop syncing this collection with the cloud? And if you stop syncing, the collection will be removed from other devices, but the photos themselves will remain. These photos can be managed from all synced photographs. So I'm going to go ahead and say stop syncing, and we'll see what happens. So notice that now that I'm not syncing desktop images, the album desktop images has gone away. So the collection or album is gone. It's been removed from the cloud. However, all of the images in that collection still show the little synced icon, and they still show up here under all photos. So the images themselves haven't been removed from the cloud, just the collection. If I want to resync that collection, I can just click it back on. And the desktop image album now returns to Lightroom Cloud. And it didn't have to add any new images this time because all of those images are still up here in all photos. But the collection or album has been re-added, and now those same photos, the 21 photos, have been re-added to the album. Anything we do to a synced collection will be synced in Lightroom Cloud as well. So if you remove images from this collection, they'll be removed from the album over here. And if you add new images into this collection, they'll be added to the album over here. So unsyncing a collection doesn't remove any photos from Lightroom Cloud. It just stops syncing the collection. If you actually want to remove an image from the cloud, there's a few different ways to do it. One way is in Lightroom Cloud, go to the image, right-click on it, and select Delete One Photo. It'll ask you, do you really want to do that? And if you say yes, delete, then that image will be removed from the cloud, and it'll be removed from all synced photographs in Lightroom Classic. It'll also be removed from any collections in Lightroom Classic that were synced with Lightroom Cloud, but it won't be removed from your image folders in your catalog, and the original file also won't be removed from your hard drive. From Lightroom Classic, if you want to remove a synced photograph from the cloud, you go to All Synced Photographs, and then go to a photograph and right-click on it, or you could select multiple photographs and remove them all at once. Once you've right-clicked on a photograph or a set of photographs, you come down to Remove from All Synced Photographs, and that will remove it from all synced photographs over here. It'll remove it from any synced collections down in Collections, and eventually it will remove it from Lightroom Cloud. In a synced collection, you can also go to an image and right-click on it and select Remove from that synced collection, and Lightroom Classic will ask you, do you want synced photos to remain in all synced photographs? That's the all synced photographs collection at the top of the catalog. If you click yes, it'll remove the image from the collection in Lightroom Classic and the corresponding album in Lightroom Cloud, but the image remains in any other synced collections, and it stays in the Lightroom Cloud photos and all synced photos in Lightroom Classic. If you click no, that will remove the image from this collection and any other synced collections that it's in, and it will also remove it from all synced photos and the Lightroom Cloud. And finally, if you ever want to remove all your photos that are in Lightroom Cloud, you can go to All Synced Photographs in Lightroom Classic, or you can go to All Photos in Lightroom Cloud and do a Control or Command A to select them all, and then select Remove from All Synced Photos or Delete Photos over in Lightroom Cloud. And whichever side you do that on, that will remove all of your images that you have in Lightroom Cloud. I don't want to do that, so I'll just get out of it. So those are the basics of Lightroom syncing. Now that we've got that, let's start looking at different ways to utilize it. Perhaps one of the most useful ways to use Lightroom syncing is so you can access images that you've edited across all your devices so that you can see them on your phone or your laptop, you can share them with other people, you can email them, and you can post them on the internet. That's basically what we already did when we synced my desktop images collection. These are all finished or edited images. Since they're finished images, my goal is to view them in Lightroom Cloud, but not do any developing with them in Lightroom Cloud. Edited images can be TIFF files, PSDs, or JPEGs that have been edited outside of Lightroom in applications such as Photoshop, or they can be raw images that are entirely edited inside of Lightroom. For example, here's a raw file that I've edited in Lightroom. And if I want to, I can click and drag it to all synced photographs, or I could put it in my desktop images synced collection. And either way, it'll end up syncing to Lightroom Cloud. Because I put it in the desktop images collection, it'll be added to all photos, and it will also be added to desktop images. So let's wait for that to sync over here. And I'm going to use a little smaller thumbnail size so we can see when it shows up. And there it is. I'm going to go ahead and sort the images here by file name. And now that they're in this other order, we can see that all of the thumbnails here tell us what type of file type the original is. So these are TIFFs, this one is a RAW file, and this one's a PSD. That just tells us what the originals are back in Lightroom Classic, but here in Lightroom Cloud, they're all just smart previews. And for viewing or sharing images on the internet, smart previews are great. You can do pretty much anything you would do with these that you do with your full res images, other than maybe make really big prints, bigger than 10 or 15 inches. If you want to make an entirely new collection of edited images to share with Lightroom Cloud, that's easy too. You can just search through your Lightroom Classic catalog and filter as you want and find some images you like. So for example, let's say I want to share this one and this one, and I don't know, let's see, maybe this one. But I don't want to just add them as individual images to all photos. I want to add them as a collection or an album. So with those selected, I can come down here to collections and make a new collection. And I'm going to call this one to share, let's say. And it doesn't need to be inside a collection set. I do want to include the photos I selected. And I also want to sync it with Lightroom. So I'll check it there and create that. And that'll create that new synced collection here in my collections in Lightroom Classic. And it will sync and create a new album in Lightroom Cloud and add those smart previews to my photos in the cloud. And there they are. Sharing completely edited images as smart previews through the cloud like this is awesome, because now I could take my iPad to my cousin's house and show him these photos from there. I could also view these photos on my laptop during a presentation if I realized I wanted to. And I can even view them on my phone in the Lightroom app. And from there, I could post them to Instagram or Facebook. In this way, I can make any image in my Lightroom Classic catalog available for viewing and sharing anywhere I am on whatever device I happen to have, and I think that's great. Another really useful benefit of syncing is the ability to take unedited RAW files on the road with you so you can edit them from anywhere. For example, here's a folder of RAW files that I haven't been able to edit yet. I want to be able to work on them a bit on a trip I'm going to be doing here soon. And I don't want to necessarily edit every one of these images, so let me just select a few. And just for the demo purposes, it's not so important. I'll just say, let's pick this group right here. Now I'll create a new collection of those. And we'll call it To Edit. And yeah, I do want to include those selected folders and sync it with Lightroom. So I'll go ahead and create that synced folder. And let that sync up. And there's the album. And there are the smart previews of the unedited RAW files. Now when I'm sitting in the back seat of the car on a road trip or on a plane or at the dentist's office or the DMV, wherever I might have a few moments, I can open up Lightroom Cloud on any device that I have with me and make those edits. And I can just go here to the editing section of Lightroom Cloud and yeah, you know, just edit the photos. I'll just do some auto edits on these for right now, just to make it quick. But those edits that I'm doing from wherever I happen to be will sync through the cloud and eventually end up back in Lightroom Classic. Now that wasn't a great job of editing, but I think you get the idea. So yeah, back here in Lightroom Classic in the 2-edit collection, all those edits have now shown up. So when I get home, they're all here. Now the cool thing is those edits aren't just here in this collection. Those edits have updated throughout my Lightroom Classic catalog as if I had actually developed the images right here in Lightroom Classic. So now if I feel like I don't need those out in the cloud anymore, I can come down here and go to that collection and right click on it and select delete. Lightroom Classic lets me know that if I delete them, the photos will remain in my catalog and will still be also included in non-synced collections, but the images will be removed from Lightroom Cloud. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to remove them from the cloud because I don't need to edit them out there anymore, but I want to keep them here in my main catalog in Lightroom Classic. So let's delete that. And we've gone ahead and got rid of that collection. They'll be taken out of Lightroom Cloud over here, and the 2-edit album will be gone soon. And they'll be removed from all photos. But up here in my folder that has those images, they're still here, and the edits are just fine wherever they are. Somewhere, there they are. So that's a great way to work on unedited images while you're away from your Lightroom Classic catalog or your main computer. And another great thing you can do while you're out on the road somewhere is in Lightroom Cloud, in all photos, any photos that you have there, you can create new albums. So these albums have come over from Lightroom Classic, but if I were to create a new album here in Lightroom Cloud, let's just call this new album. And let's see, I've got one photo selected, so that's fine. So that photo's in there. But let's put a couple more in there just for fun. Now that new album will sync from Lightroom Cloud back over here to my collections in Lightroom Classic. And where does it go? It goes right here into a collection set called From Lightroom. I actually added the word cloud onto mine. You can rename that set just like any other set in Lightroom. But anyway, so From Lightroom Cloud, or yours will say From Lightroom, and there's my new album from over here. It was called New Album, and the new album is in my collections. And once it's in this collection set, it doesn't have to stay there. I could put it in any other collection set, or I could move it down here out on its own where it's not in a collection set. But that new album collection will stay synced back to the album in Lightroom Cloud until I unsync it or delete it. And doing that didn't create any new copies of these images in Lightroom Classic or on my hard drive, because these are just previews in the Lightroom catalog, and they still link back to the original image files up in the folders. So these are no different than any other collections here in our Lightroom Classic collections. Another useful application of syncing with the cloud is when you take photos when you're on a trip, you can add them to Lightroom Cloud on your laptop or your device, let's say a tablet, from your camera or a memory card. And the full resolution RAW files will be waiting for you in your Lightroom Classic catalog and saved on your computer when you get home. We know that when you add images to Lightroom Cloud from Lightroom Classic, it always uploads just smart previews. But when you go the other direction and add images directly into Lightroom Cloud, it uploads the original image files to the cloud, and that's what gets synced back to Lightroom Classic and saved on your computer, not smart previews. When you add images to Lightroom Cloud and they get uploaded to your Creative Cloud account, these do count against your storage limit. Depending on the plan you have, you either have 20 gigabytes or maybe 1 terabyte of Creative Cloud storage. You can purchase more storage from Adobe, but I just don't think it's very cost effective. So depending how many total raw image files you have, I don't think too many people are going to be able to store all of their raw image files up in the cloud. But if you have the 20 gigabyte plan, that's enough to save up to several hundred raw files in the cloud, and that's enough for most trips. And if you have the 1 terabyte plan, then you can store probably a few thousand raw files in the cloud, and that gets a little more useful for longer trips or if you want to just store more images out there. When you add images to Lightroom Cloud, the full resolution files will be saved to your Lightroom Classic catalog and hard drive in a default location. In Windows, it's C, Users, Username, Pictures, and on a Mac, it's Users, Username, Pictures. You can use the default locations if you want, but that's not where I want to save my full res files, so I choose a different location. To do this, in Lightroom Classic, you go to the cloud icon and click on the gear. And right down here, you want to check Specify Location and then choose the location where you do want these images to be saved. For me, it's in my Photos to Edit in a folder called From Lightroom Cloud. And I also check, and this is up to you, use subfolders formatted by capture date. And this will put my images that I'm taking on my trip and uploading to the cloud in dated folders that match the other dated folders in my Lightroom Classic catalog. So here's how that would work. Let's say I'm out somewhere and I've taken some photos in my camera, and on my laptop with an internet connection or without an internet connection at the moment, I can still add them to Lightroom Cloud without an internet connection. And when I get an internet connection, then the syncing can happen. So you just go to Add Photos and you go to where those photos are. And here they are on my memory card from my camera. And here are those images that I took. And actually, these are old images that I had left over on a flash card. And I'm not going to add them all right now because there's a lot and that would take forever. But let's just pick a few to add. So I'm going to just do those 6. And then I can say add 6 photos. Or if I also want to add them to an album/collection at the same time, I could do that. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and add these to a new album. And I'm just going to call this From Trip. And then I'll go ahead and create that album and add the photos. So those photos are being added from my memory card to Lightroom Cloud. And they're also being put into the From Trip album. And now they'll start syncing to Lightroom Classic through the cloud. But if we take a look here, what is syncing are not smart previews. This time we're syncing the original raw files. And in the cloud, it's pending. Just for comparison, if we go back to all photos and I look at one of the smart previews we had and we go to info, we can see that, yeah, there's smart previews in the cloud from that because those came over from Lightroom Classic. But in the images here from the trip that I'm adding the original raw files, those we're getting the original raw files here locally and uploading the original raw files. Now out here on my trip, I could go through and do things like maybe initial star ratings if I wanted to, and I could begin editing these photos here in Lightroom. So whatever edits I wanted to do to these, I could do that here in Lightroom Cloud. And I don't know exactly what edits I want to do. Let's see. Something like that, let's say. And I went through and I edited these photos. And when those are all done syncing, they will show up not only here in Lightroom Cloud, but back in Lightroom Classic on my home computer. Now on a trip, I wouldn't be sitting here waiting for these to sync. As long as I left my laptop on and my home computer was on and I had an internet connection, they would sync while I was doing other things and be waiting for me when I got home. But here, while we're waiting for them to sync, let me talk about some downsides to this method in addition to whatever Creative Cloud storage limit you have. First of all, upload speed and cost will be determined by the internet connection you have on location. So if you have a slow hotel or plain Wi-Fi, you probably won't be able to get anything to upload, and there's probably a limit on what they'll allow you to do anyway. And also, if you're using certain internet connections while you're traveling, or maybe a phone hotspot, some of those charge you by the amount of data you use. And this is a lot of data since we're transferring original RAW files. So be aware that you could get charged a lot for syncing like this from the road. Also, if your computer at home is not on, then the images won't sync to Lightroom Classic until you get home and turn it back on. And when you do get home, if the syncing isn't finished yet or it hasn't even started yet, you can turn on your computer and it'll start syncing at that point. But even if you have a really fast internet connection, syncing original RAW files through the cloud like this will take much longer than simply downloading from your memory card to your computer. So depending on how much of a hurry you're in, this may not be the best way to go. So when those original RAW files do sync over to Lightroom Classic on my home computer, where do I find them? Well, if you'll remember, I designated a specific folder for them to download to, and that's in my Photos to Edit folder right here. They're in a subfolder called From Lightroom Cloud, and they're being added into subfolders by date. So if I click on that, here we can see all 6 of those files have made it over now. And if you remember, I also put them in this album called From Trip. And so that should also be a collection down here in my collections from Lightroom Cloud. There it is, From Trip. Now the cool part about this is these photos in this folder right here are in my Lightroom Classic catalog, and they're saved to my hard drive, to my D drive in that location. So they are up in the cloud, but they're also on my computer. And now I can move them where I want them. So for example, if I just move this dated folder up here out of the From Lightroom Cloud, whoops, I didn't mean to put it inside that folder. Let's move it right here. And I didn't move that to the correct year. But the point is that those original RAW files are now in my Lightroom catalog like the rest of my images. And From Lightroom Cloud is empty again. And then if I wanted to, either up here in all synced photographs or down here in that collection I made from Trip, if I didn't actually need them as a collection, and I also didn't need them out in the cloud anymore because these full res RAW files are taking up some of my cloud storage, and now that they're downloaded onto my computer at home, I don't really need them out there in the cloud anymore. So I can come in here and say, delete this synced collection. And when I delete those now, those will be removed from the collections. They'll be removed from the album over here, and they'll be removed from all synced photographs, but they'll still be right here, safe and sound, in my catalog and on my computer. So depending on what your needs are and what your internet connection will be while you're traveling, this can be a great opportunity to work on your images while you're traveling, back them up to the cloud as you go, and then have all your images, your original RAW files, waiting for you with any edits you've made when you get back from the trip. If you use Lightroom Cloud on a tablet or a phone that has a camera, then photos you take with the Adobe Lightroom app will be added to your cloud storage, included in your Lightroom Cloud photos, and synced to Lightroom Classic. The Adobe Lightroom app has some amazing camera features that are way better than the regular camera app on your device. For example, you can have full manual control over things like shutter speed, focus, white balance, and ISO, and you can even capture raw DNG files instead of JPEGs. So when you want the power of the Lightroom camera or the ability to use Lightroom editing on your phone photos, or you want to be able to sync those photos to the cloud, go to the Lightroom camera app, take the photo, edit the photo in Lightroom Cloud on your device. Well, that's not a good photo, but I'm just going to do a quick auto edit here, and then you can check the sync progress. And when it's finished uploading, you'll see the edited photo in other devices through Lightroom Cloud, and it'll show up in your Lightroom Classic catalog under From Lightroom Cloud. You can then move them to the location that you want in your Lightroom Classic catalog. In the app on your device, make sure that you go to Settings, Import, and that Auto Add from Camera Roll for both photos and video is off. Otherwise, the Lightroom app will import all the images in your camera roll that you took with the regular phone camera, and it'll upload those to the cloud and to your Lightroom Classic catalog. Unless you want to do this, leave it off so only photos you take with the Lightroom app or photos you choose to import get synced up to the cloud. On rare occasions, I want to sync RAW files or other images from Lightroom Classic to Lightroom Cloud so I can access them from anywhere. But instead of just smart previews, I actually want the full resolution file or master files for some reason. Like I said, this doesn't happen that often, but sometimes I need to edit images while I'm away from home and then maybe send the high-res version to a publisher or maybe order a large print. If it's just a few images, I could easily just transfer the original RAW files on a memory card over to my laptop before I left. So this isn't something that's absolutely critical to be able to do, but it's technically possible and sometimes it's handy, so I figured I'd show it to you. As we now know, syncing from Lightroom Classic to the cloud will only upload smart previews. But here in Lightroom Classic is where it's easy to search for and find images, especially if they're RAW files which don't show thumbnails outside of Lightroom. So this is how this works. On your computer in Lightroom Classic, find the image or images that you need the original versions of out in the cloud. I'm going to add images that are not yet synced with the cloud, but it also works with images that have previously been synced and already have smart previews in Lightroom Cloud. So I'm just going to look in this folder here and let's see, I don't know, I'm going to do a quick filtering here for some attributes. And let's say, I don't know, doesn't really particularly matter, but yeah, let's say this is 1. So I'm going to select that one and also maybe one of these RAW files. I don't know, let's say like this, this one's a RAW file. Yeah, so let's select these two, and those are the ones that I want. The original files, one's a RAW file, and the other one's actually a TIFF file with layers, wherever it went. A TIFF file with layers that I've already edited in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is create a new collection of those and include the selected photos, sync it with Lightroom, and we'll call this Originals, just as a collection name that we can remember what it means. And I'll go ahead and create that. And so here is that collection called Originals, and it's being synced to the cloud, and there they are. This one is a TIFF file right there, and this one is a RAW file. But we know when those sync from Lightroom Classic to Lightroom Cloud, that what goes into this album and into all photos are going to be smart previews. So even though here in Lightroom Cloud, it tells me that that's a RAW file and that's a TIFF file, I know that the originals are, but that because of these little circles, I'm just seeing smart previews here, not the originals in the cloud. So in that situation, here's what you do. So for the TIFF file, I'm going to right click on it and tell it to show it to me in Explorer. And here it is. And so from here, I can just drag the original TIFF file into Lightroom Cloud and drop it. And then say, yes, add that photo. And now I'm adding the original TIFF file to Lightroom Cloud. And we know that when you add original files in Lightroom Cloud, it uploads the full resolution version. So I'll now have that full resolution file in the cloud, but I was able to find it and add it from Lightroom Classic. So I can close this and go to the raw file, and find that in Explorer. And there it is. And so I can also grab that and bring that over here and drop that in and say add that one as well. And now as we watch these, we'll see that out in the cloud, it was only the Smart Preview before, but now we've added the original raw file, and it's going to now update and upload that raw file to replace the Smart Preview in the cloud. And we're not making a second copy in the cloud. Lightroom understands that the Smart Preview and the raw file are the same image, so it's just replacing the Smart Preview with the original file. And so the raw file has finished uploading the original raw to the cloud, and the TIFF file is a bigger file, so it's taking longer. It's going to work on that for a bit more here. And now the original TIFF file is there as well. And large TIFF files can take forever to upload and download to the cloud like that. So I wouldn't recommend doing a lot of them that way, but if you need to, it's certainly an option. And I don't think I pointed out before that when you do have the original file in the cloud, instead of the little dash circle, you get a circle with a check mark in it. So now that these are in the cloud, when I go to work on them on my laptop or any other device through Lightroom Cloud later on, I'll have access to those full resolution files. And in the case of the TIFF file, I can even edit in Photoshop. And I have that full original TIFF file with all the layers and masks. And I can work on them here in Photoshop, wherever I am. And those updates will be updated back into the cloud and back to that original TIFF file, which is synced with the cloud in Lightroom Classic. So this method does take up some of your cloud storage for a while, as long as you've got those out there in the cloud, and it can take quite a while to get everything to sync up. But in certain situations, it can be really useful to sync full resolution files to the Creative Cloud this way. Okay, that's a wrap. Everything you need to know for making the most of your Adobe Photography subscription and taking advantage of syncing images through your Creative Cloud account. To recap, in this class, we covered Creative Cloud storage plans, Lightroom Sync settings and setup, different methods of syncing images or collections of smart previews to the cloud so you can access them from anywhere on any device, editing smart previews in Lightroom Cloud and syncing them back to the originals in Lightroom Classic, adding original images to Lightroom Cloud so they'll automatically sync back to your Lightroom Classic catalog at home, and using Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Cloud to upload selected original files to the cloud from your home computer. So I hope this has been an informative class, and I'm glad you joined me. I'm sure you're learning a lot here at the Lightroom Virtual Summit. If you're also a Photoshop user or Photoshop curious, I invite you to follow my YouTube channel and also to check out my full courses and the TK panel, which are available through my website. Make sure to get my free course called 10 Steps to Getting Started in Photoshop, and also use my code that you'll find in the Lightroom Summit virtual swag bag to get a discount on all my courses. It's been my pleasure teaching you about Lightroom syncing, so I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.